Welcome to the last part of Chapter 4, 4.2. We're talking about Southern Society to Early Settlers. This is also the last section of our unit before our unit exam for all the AP students here at Coleridge. We're here in Western Colorado. Gotta love it. We're going to talk here about Southern Society. Last time we talked about African slavery and the awful evilness that it was. Just before the Revolutionary War, 70% of leaders in Virginia legislature came from families established in Virginia before 1690. So, not a lot of immigrants in terms of power. People that came here were established, they owned land, made a name for themselves, and they passed it on to their families. And so the leaders were largely descendants of these people that arrived and broke the new land and did all these trailblazing things. Also, they had the legacy of also bringing in African slaves and all that. On a social scale in the South, you have the planters who are the elite. They're the leaders. They own gangs of slaves. They have vast domains of land. They ruled the region's economy. They monopolized political power. They were in charge, and they're the people we think of in terms of our founding fathers, the Washingtons, the Jeffersons, the Henrys, and people like that. You have small farmers, which is the largest social group. This is the average, settler that went out and broke their own ground and had a farm to sustain their family. They tilled their own modest plots and may have owned one or two slaves if they were lucky, but they really just did subsistence farming. They're not making tons of money. You have the landless whites who were the former indentured servants who largely lived in the cities and were looking for work elsewhere. And then you had, lastly, who we talked about in the previous chapter, black slaves or African slaves. We're going to shift to New England now. I just wanted to finish that up. New England tended to migrate in families, whereas you had a lot of single men in the South trying to make a way for themselves and not a lot of single ladies. New Englanders came as families, and people that came to New England, largely the Puritans, had money. They lived 10 years longer than people than people in England. So in Virginia and Maryland and in the South, people are living 10 years less, and in New England, they are that much more healthy. Family came first for New Englanders. They were very fertile. They got married early and they had lots and lots of babies. So even though they didn't maybe talk about procreation much in society, they certainly did a lot in New England. When you own a farm or a factory or anything, the more kids you have, the easier your job is because they can help you eventually. A typical woman in New England had 10 pregnancies, with about 8 surviving, which was much better than the South and much better than even the Old World, which led to stable families that taught discipline and hard work and a lot of the values that Americans hold dear. Southern women had property rights in the South because of the high death rate. So Southern women actually had more rights than Northern women because men were dying left and right there, and so they could actually keep their property and not have to give it up to heirs, sons, you name it. Northern women were blocked from having the same rights when they got married. Widows were protected. A lot of times a woman would get married, she would lose her property rights when she got married. It became her husband's land. But widows were protected. They were also protected against abusive husbands. For them, what we're talking about. Today's standards are much much higher in terms of treatment of women than they had, but they did protect them against abusive husbands at some point. Above all, though, laws of Puritan New England sought to defend the integrity of marriage. That was the big thing. Marriage was something holy, an act from God, and it led to the growth of their colony. Life in New England towns, they lived in close-knit small towns. There's a sense of unity and a very tough climate with a common culture. They lived together, and then they'd go out to their fields and work. New towns were legally chartered by the colonial authorities, and the distribution of land was entrusted to the proprietors. Every family received several parcels of land that was equal, and so it's much more democratic. You don't have this pyramid-shaped, society like the South. It's more very, very similar, and the makeup, the culture of the North of New England really fits that as well. Each town had a meeting house or a village green where they would meet and talk and vote and settle things for the town. It's very democratic. Towns of more than 50 families had to have an elementary school. Public education was started largely in New England, and that tradition spread out across the country. Harvard College was established in 1636. It's the first college in America. The second was in William and Mary, Virginia, by the way. That was formed in 1693. Puritans ran their own churches, and they had democracy in the congregational church. Government led logically to democracy and political government. So church members voting in the congregational church kind of went hand in hand with voting in political government. And Jefferson said that the best school of political liberty that the world ever saw was these town meetings that each town would hold to discuss whether to build a new bridge or to plow some more land or what to do. And you get this very nice picture of New England towns like we have here with Fall, and very pretty with the church spire and the red barn and the broken down Ford Explorer, which I just noticed right there. We go forward. The growing population, though, dispersed the Puritans. That their power was broken down. The people that were hardcore Puritans, that wanted to purify the Church of England, not as strong as they once were because of immigration, and each successive generation wasn't as devout as maybe their parents. New generations were less zealous. You have the Jeremiah sermons began, which would scold parishioners for their sins, which is the Jonathan Edwards thing that God despises you. And so in 1662, the halfway covenant was announced, which would admit to baptism but not full communion, the unconverted children of existing members. And so they're kind of like, all right, some of you guys that aren't maybe full Puritans, you can be baptized, but don't think you're getting bread and wine, okay? We can't feed you. We'll put some water on your head, but we can't feed you. Oh, I hit the wrong button. My bad. A group of adolescent girls in Salem, Massachusetts claimed to have been bewitched by some certain older women. And we get the very famous witch hunt that ensued, leading to the legal lynching of 20 women in 1692 and 2 dogs, which is, the Scarlet Letter and all that stuff. And, we always compare it to the McCarthy hearings and the Red Scare of the 1950s, but a lot of rumor mills going on there, and they did some really goofy things of executing women and witches and all that bad stuff. In 1693, the witchcraft hysteria ended when the governor of Massachusetts prohibited any further trials and pardoned those that were already convicted. It didn't do much for the ones that were already lynched, and those 2 poor dogs as well. In 1713, Massachusetts legislature annulled the conviction of the witches and made the reparation for their heirs, the ones that were executed. And it's a kind of a hysteria that kind of gripped this community and just showed the power of a mob. Really, what a mob can do when it has action and it has a purpose, and it can lead to really, really bad things. This is on a small scale. On a larger scale, it leads to the rise of Nazi Germany, or in places like that. This is some of the. I think it's a book from the Puritans showing how they taught. I forgot. Sorry. The New England way of life with a harsh soil and a harsh climate made large-scale farming difficult. You're not going to have cash crops. You're going to just barely sustain yourself. You need to turn elsewhere to make money. Maybe you go out fishing, which was a big one, or shipping, or trade, or whatever you can do to get by. There's less diversity in New England. The Native Americans recognized their right to use the land, but the concept of owning it was unknown. We'll come back to that. I mean, natives really thought that you couldn't own the land, just like you can't own the air you're breathing, and you can't own the river because the water keeps moving. They thought the same thing about land. So it really kind of led to a clash. Native Americans didn't understand the white European concept of land ownership. So New Englanders turned to shipbuilding, commerce, fishing for money, you name it. Building really cool lighthouses and making calendars out of it. I mean, that's a beautiful picture. Wow. And you have the combination of cowardice, soil, and the climate of New England made for the energy, the purposefulness, the sternness, the stubbornness, the self-reliance, the resourcefulness. That's just a lot of ness. It just made New England New England. They are hardcore. They're hardcore. They were the troublemakers of America. They were rebellious, and they weren't going to be told what to do because they knew better. The term Yankee ingenuity in New England conscious spread to the whole nation. They basically, let's come up with a better way to do it, and let's make sure we have a good conscience. Let's make sure we're doing what's right for God, and not sinning, and that influenced the rest of the country. Women slave or free and on southern plantations and northern farms. This is kind of what they did on day to day. They wove, they cooked, they cleaned, they cared for the children. They did the traditional women's work. And so this is kind of what they did on a day-to-day basis. Men, they cleared the land, they did the fencing, they planted, they cropped the land, they cut firewood, they butchered the livestock. They did all of this stuff. There was a lot of resentment against upper class pretensions was strong in America. We didn't like people that were uppity. We didn't like people that were nobles and they would not lift a finger. In America, you work and you earn it. We are still the hardest working country in the world. We work more hours and take less vacation than anybody. And we need to change that. Sweden's adopting a 6-hour workday. I don't know. It sounds kind of nice. This idea of the upper class and the pretentiousness sparked Bacon's rebellion. We have these small, farmers and indentured servants rising up because they want to earn it. They don't want just anything handed to them. Americans, we don't believe in the silver spoon, and we don't like titles, and it all comes back from these colonial days. The uprising of Maryland's Protestants toward the end of the 17th century is another example of this, that they didn't like all the pretentious and high-class Catholics. I know you guys are wondering about the picture. I'll get to it in a second. Trust me. I pity the fool who don't know what this picture is. In New York, animosity between lordly landowners and aspiring merchants fueled Leisler's rebellion from 1689 to 1691. Remember, they had these huge estates from the patroons, from the Dutch and the Duke of York giving out lands. And so, these lordly landowners they clashed with the merchants and the hard-working people. In 1651, to show their distaste for the upper class, Massachusetts prohibited poorer folk from wearing gold or silver lace. So you could not be Mr. T. Sorry, Mr. T. In the 18th century, Virginia, a tailor was fined and jailed for arranging to race his horse, which was a sport only for gentlemen. Apparently you weren't supposed to do that. In Kentucky, yeah, but not Virginia. Come on. So that's it for chapter 4. Kind of getting a snapshot. We're quickly moving towards this is America, this is Britain. Who's in charge? Really? And if Britain tells us what to do, we're going to fight. Have any questions, put them in the comments, in the comment section of the video. Hope you enjoyed this. Take care.